2007, a convicted human trafficker walked out of a German prison after serving 3 years of a 9-year sentence and boarded a flight to Turkey. That same year, the prosecutor who put him there packed up and fled Germany. Think about that sequence for a moment. The criminal went free, and it was the prosecutor who went into hiding. For the next 18 years, police in 4 countries would arrest this man again and again, and every single time, he would walk out the front door. This is the story of Necati Arabaci and the hunt that took 2 decades to end. Necati Arabaci was born on February 14, 1972 in Cologne, Germany. His parents had come from the Beyşehir district of Konya in central Turkey as part of the Gastarbeiter program, the guest workers scheme that brought hundreds of thousands of Turkish families to West Germany in the 1960s and 1970s to fill the labor shortage in the country's post-war industrial economy. They were not supposed to stay permanently. Most of them did. By the time Arabaci was born, the Turkish community in Cologne, numbered in the hundreds of thousands, concentrated in districts like Çorweiler and Nippies, on the edges of the city where the rents were lower and the integration into mainstream German society was slower and harder. These were communities defined by the gap between 2 worlds. Turkish at home, German outside, and often not fully accepted as either. The language barrier that the first generation navigated imperfectly passed to the second generation as something more complicated. A fluency in German that still could not always open the doors that German fluency was supposed to open. Arabaci's parents worked. His father ran a fruit and vegetable business, the same cover his son would later use to disguise an entirely different kind of operation. The family lived quietly in the way that working-class immigrant families live quietly. Getting through, making enough, trying to give the next generation something better than what they had arrived with. Their son had a different idea of what better looked like. Little is documented about his specific path through adolescence. What is documented is where that path led. By the time he was in his 20s, he had found the entry point that Cologne's nightlife offered to a young man with physical presence, the right connections, and no particular attachment to the rules that governed legitimate employment. He started as a bouncer, a doorman at clubs in the red light district that ran through the heart of the city's entertainment landscape. It was not a glamorous start, but it was the right start for what he was building toward. In the 1990s, his name began appearing on the radar of German law enforcement for the first time, not in connection with violence or drugs, but in connection with nightlife. Cologne's red light district was one of the most lucrative criminal landscapes in Germany, and the outlaw motorcycle clubs, particularly the Hells Angels, had long understood that controlling the door of a nightclub meant controlling everything that happened inside it. The security business was the entry point. The money that followed was something else. Arabaci understood that logic before he ever put on a patch. He built his initial network through connections to Hells Angels affiliated bouncers, positioning crews of security guards at nightclubs across Cologne. Those positions gave him access to venues and to the women working in them, and from that access he built an empire. He disguised it behind the fruit business his father had run. On paper, Necati Arabaci was a greengrocer. In practice, he was running one of the most powerful criminal prostitution networks in the city. The Babylon in Elsdorf near Cologne, the Wiago in Leverkusen, establishments on the Spanish island of Majorca, others owned through front companies whose paper trails ran through names that had no obvious connection to him. By the late 1990s, he was reportedly controlling operations that stretched as far as Frankfurt and the Ruhr area. The women inside those establishments were not there voluntarily. The operations that ran them involved coercion and debt bondage that systematically removed any capacity the women inside them had to walk away. This was not organized crime at the margins. It was organized crime at industrial scale, operating in plain sight behind a fruit stand. In the nightlife world of Cologne, the Hells Angels were already the dominant force. They controlled the door scene across the Kölner Ringe, the entertainment district that ran through the heart of the city, and with that control came everything that happened inside those venues. Arabaci had been working alongside Hells Angels affiliated bouncers throughout the 1990s, building his network through those connections. By the early 2000s, he formalized what had been an informal arrangement and became a patched member of the Hells Angels Cologne chapter. He was not a young man looking for identity in a motorcycle club. He was an established criminal operator who had spent a decade building the infrastructure the Hells Angels represented. He brought them clients, venues, contacts, and a network that had been running profitably for years. They brought him organizational muscle, territorial recognition, and the patch that announced to every rival in Cologne that the man wearing it had the full weight of the most powerful outlaw motorcycle club in Germany behind him. The combination produced something that German law enforcement had been watching build for years without yet having assembled a case strong enough to bring it down. That changed in 2002. Arrest number 1. Germany, 2002. In 2002, a German special task force arrested Arabaci. The investigation that followed connected every layer of what he had built across the previous decade. The front companies, the trafficking networks, the women brought from Eastern Europe into establishments he controlled through names that had no obvious paper trail back to him. 2 years of proceedings ended in a courtroom in 2004 when Arabaci confessed and was sentenced to 9 years in prison for leading a criminal organization, human trafficking, forced prostitution robbery, extortion, and weapons violations. The prosecutors who secured that sentence believed they had finally closed the door on him. But Arabaci was already thinking about the man who had built the case that put him in Bochum prison. And from inside that cell, he allegedly began making plans. The prosecutor plot. The lead prosecutor in Arabaci's case was a man named Jürgen Botzum. He had built the investigation that produced the confession and the 9-year sentence. From inside his cell in Bochum prison, Arabaci was suspected of deciding that Botzum needed to be eliminated. Police received intelligence that Arabaci had hired an Albanian contract killer from Duisburg to carry out the murder. The response from investigators was immediate. They bugged the visiting room of his cell and began recording every conversation that took place there. The prosecutor was placed under police protection and given bodyguards. The investigation was now not just about the original trafficking and prostitution conviction. It was about a murder plot being coordinated from inside a maximum security prison against the man who had put him there. The recordings appeared to confirm what investigators had suspected. Based on the transcripts of those bugged conversations, prosecutors built a case not just for additional criminal charges, but for something more significant. They pursued Sicherungsverwahrung, the German legal mechanism for the indefinite imprisonment of extremely dangerous criminals. If successful, it would have meant Arabaci never left prison regardless of what any fixed sentence said. The case went to trial. At trial, a mistranslation was detected in some of the transcripts. The conversations recorded in that bugged visiting room had been translated from their original language into German for use as evidence, and some of those translations contained inaccuracies. What the transcripts appeared to say and what they actually said were not the same thing in every instance. The prosecution's case rested on those transcripts. The mistranslation undermined them. Arabaci was acquitted of the additional charges. The prosecution had the recordings. They had the intelligence about the Albanian contract killer from Duisburg. They had the evidence of the plot gathered through months of surveillance of a bugged prison visiting room. And it collapsed at trial because of a translation error. In 2007, after serving approximately 3 years of his 9-year sentence, Arabaci was released and deported to Turkey under the condition that he never returned to Germany. He had served 1/3 of the sentence that was supposed to represent the justice system's full accounting of what he had done. But the detail that completes the picture came after the deportation. When Arabaci boarded that flight to Turkey in 2007, the prosecutor who had built the case against him and spent months under police protection while investigators tried to prove a murder plot fled Germany. Jürgen Botzum, the man who had secured the 9-year conviction, left the country the same year his defendant was deported. The prosecutor did not feel safe in Germany once Arabaci was no longer behind bars. He left. Arabaci landed in Turkey. Botzum disappeared from Germany. And the condition attached to the deportation that said Arabaci could never return to Germany was about to become the foundation of an entirely new kind of freedom. Botzum disappeared from Germany. and the condition attached to the deportation that said Arabaci could never return to Germany was about to become the foundation of an entirely new kind of freedom. The rule that breaks the story. Turkey is not a member of the European Union, and Turkey does not extradite its own citizens to foreign jurisdictions regardless of what those jurisdictions are asking for. That single legal fact was about to turn an entire continent's law enforcement apparatus into something Arabaci could simply walk around. In 2015, a Spanish court issued a European arrest warrant for Arabaci, citing alleged involvement in a criminal organization extortion pimping and drug trafficking. The warrant was valid across every member state of the European Union. His name was entered into the Schengen Information System, the database that all Schengen member states use to share law enforcement information in real time. Every border crossing, every airport, every police officer in every EU country now had access to a flag that said, "This man is wanted." If Arabaci set foot on EU soil, he could be arrested immediately. But he was in Turkey, and the warrant could not follow him there. What European legal architecture had accidentally created was a situation where a man carrying an active EU-wide arrest warrant could live freely and openly in a neighboring country, operate a criminal organization with international reach, travel to non-EU jurisdictions without restriction, and film himself doing all of it on social media without any immediate legal consequence. But the warrant was real. The enforcement mechanism had a wall built around it, and Arabaci was on the other side of that wall. Rather than lying low, he expanded. By 2010, he had become president of the Hells Angels MC Nomads Turkey chapter, formally consolidating his position at the top of the organization's Turkish structure. From that platform, he was allegedly building the network's reach across Europe through the same combination of criminal infrastructure and organizational muscle that had made him powerful in Cologne. The deportation that was supposed to remove him from the European criminal landscape had instead given him a base of operations that European law enforcement could identify but could not reach. The scale of what he was allegedly running during this period became clear only later when investigators began mapping the organization's international footprint. 100 kilograms of marijuana seized in Germany, 890 kilograms of cocaine intercepted in Brazil, 84.4 kilograms of marijuana recovered in Spain. Investigators suspected the financial foundation underneath all of it had been built through heroin smuggling. And while all of that was happening, Arabaci was not hiding. In 2023, he attended the circumcision ceremony of crime boss Ayhan Bora Kaplan's son and reportedly gifted a gold chain. A man carrying an active European arrest warrant attended a public celebration alongside senior figures in the Turkish criminal world without any apparent concern about the consequences. On social media, he was becoming something no law enforcement agency had a protocol for. Videos of Arabaci circulating on TikTok and Instagram showed him in Monte Carlo surrounded by luxury cars being watched by millions of people who had no idea who he was beyond what the algorithm served them. A man convicted of human trafficking and forced prostitution had become a social media personality. German experts began commenting publicly on the phenomenon, struggling to explain how a wanted criminal had become aspirational content. The nets that would not hold. Between 2015 and 2025, every time law enforcement managed to get their hands on Arabaci, the result was the same. Detained, questioned, released. In 2018, Turkish authorities detained him. He was released due to insufficient evidence. In 2020, he was detained again in Bodrum in connection with a murder case. He was held for a period, then released. 2 detentions in Turkey, 2 releases. The pattern was not bad luck for investigators. It was structural. The indictment eventually filed against him in Turkey revealed why. Victims hesitated to go to authorities. Witnesses who had given statements retracted them. The cases kept collapsing not because the evidence was inherently weak, but because the people who had experienced what his organization was capable of had made a simple calculation. Testifying was more dangerous than staying silent. The organization's reputation was doing the work that explicit intimidation did not need to do. Every release reinforced that calculation for every potential witness watching. The man kept walking out. The law kept leaving without him, and the people with the most direct knowledge of what he had done kept deciding that silence was safer than speaking. By 2025, Arabaci had been carrying an active EU arrest warrant for 10 years. He had been detained and released in Turkey twice. He had been filmed in Monte Carlo and photographed at criminal celebrations in Istanbul. He had never spent more than a brief period in custody since his 2007 deportation. Then, in September 2025, he traveled to Europe. And this time, the sequence did not repeat itself the way it always had. The Slovakia moment, September 2025. On the evening of September 9th, 2025. Necati Arabaci was sitting in a restaurant in Nitra, Western Slovakia, dining with his family when approximately 12 armed police officers arrived, and that evening ended quickly. Slovak police had identified him through the Schengen information system. Germany had placed a flag on his name in late August 2025, and the system had done exactly what it was designed to do. A wanted man had crossed into Schengen territory, and the officers had come. Slovak police spokesman Roman Hayek confirmed it directly. Mr. Arabaci has been listed in the Schengen information system since late August at Germany's request. After confirming his identity, we contacted German authorities and initiated proceedings for his administrative expulsion. Arabaci was taken into custody. For a moment, it appeared that 10 years of a warrant that could not reach him had finally found its moment. Then the lawyers went to work. Arabaci had registered as a family member of an EU citizen. That status under Slovak law created a legal protection that the administrative expulsion proceedings could not override. A person registered as a family member of an EU citizen cannot be held for deportation under the same procedures that apply to other foreign nationals. The legal basis for detaining him for expulsion did not exist in the form Slovak authorities had initially applied for. They contacted German authorities, confirmed the situation, and released him. He walked out to cheers from supporters who had been waiting outside. A 30-day order to leave Slovakia was issued. He was given a month to make his own arrangements and leave the country that had just arrested and released him. The social media response was immediate. Footage of the release circulated. His supporters treated it as a victory. Another net. Another release. Another demonstration that the system kept finding reasons to let him go. For anyone watching the pattern, it looked exactly like every previous detention. The law arrived. The law left without him. But this time, something was different about what happened next. Instead of returning to Turkey and resuming the pattern, Arabaci flew to Belgrade. And from Belgrade on October 5th, 2025, he boarded a flight to Izmir. Turkish police from the Organized Crime Unit were waiting at Adnan Menderes Airport when he landed. The Izmir arrest, October 2025. The Izmir Chief Public Prosecutor's Office confirmed the detention in a formal statement. Koskun Necati Arabaci had been detained at Adnan Menderes Airport in the Gaziemir district of Izmir on October 5th, 2025, on charges of establishing an organization to commit crimes and aggravated extortion. The Organized Crime Unit of the Provincial Police Department had been waiting for him. His interrogation began immediately. The charges were serious, not the administrative expulsion proceedings that had produced and then failed to hold him in Slovakia. An organized crime indictment built around his alleged role at the top of a criminal organization and the specific charge of aggravated extortion. The kind of charges that, if they held, would produce the outcome that every previous detention had failed to produce. The Izmir 26th Criminal Court of First Instance reviewed the case and ordered his release under judicial control. Conditions attached, supervised, but out. The pattern that had repeated itself across 2 decades appeared to be repeating again. Detained. A court order. Release. But this time, the Chief Public Prosecutor's Office objected. The objection was filed immediately and referred to the Izmir First Heavy Criminal Court for review. That court examined the case, the charges and the prosecution's objection, and reached a different conclusion from the court that had ordered the release. The Izmir First Heavy Criminal Court revoked the release order. Arabaci would not be walking out under judicial control. He would be tried in custody. The door that had opened swung shut before he walked through it. For a man who had been detained and released so many times that the pattern had become almost predictable the moment the revocation came down was genuinely different from everything that had preceded it. Not because the charges were necessarily stronger than previous cases had been, but because this time when the system produced a release order, there was another part of the system waiting to challenge it. And that challenge succeeded. To understand what that moment meant, you have to trace the full line of what came before it. The whiplash climax. A 9-year sentence served in 3 years. A murder plot against a prosecutor that collapsed over a translation error. A deportation that became a base of operations. An EU arrest warrant that covered an entire continent but stopped at a border. 2 detentions in Turkey released both times. A 3rd detention at a restaurant in Slovakia released because of an EU citizenship registration. And then a 4th detention at an airport in Izmir that produced a release order from one court only for a second court to revoke it before he walked out. Every previous detention had ended the same way. But the pattern had a vulnerability that none of the previous detentions had exposed. The cases that kept failing were failing partly because witnesses were too afraid to testify. But an organized crime indictment built around the leadership of the organization itself does not depend on individual victims coming forward in the same way. The structure of the case was different, and the prosecution's willingness to object to the release order the moment it was issued was different. For the first time in over 2 decades, the system did not simply process the detention and produce a release. It pushed back. He had not been sentenced. Prosecutors were seeking up to 35 years. None of that was resolved. But for the first time, the resolution was not in his hands. Necati Arabaci is currently held in Izmir awaiting trial. The indictment has been accepted by the Izmir Heavy Criminal Court. Prosecutors are seeking up to 35 years in prison on charges that include organization leadership qualified robbery, aggravated intentional injury, and firearms violations. He has not been sentenced. The prosecutors are seeking 35 years. Those are different things, and the distance between them matters in a case where every previous legal proceeding produced an outcome different from what the prosecution had intended. But while he sits in custody, the organization he built is still being taken apart around him. In May 2026, a Turkish operation centered in Istanbul seized 780 million Turkish lira in assets connected to his network, 22 properties, 7 vehicles, stakes in 8 companies, 5 suspects detained in a single operation. On the same day in Germany, 1,200 police officers conducted coordinated raids on Hells Angels targets across North Rhine-Westphalia in an operation that investigators linked to the same criminal infrastructure. The man was in a cell. The machine was still running. And law enforcement on 2 continents was still working through what he had built piece by piece, property by property, company by company. The career that started with a fruit stand in Cologne in the 1990s had by 2026 produced a network that required simultaneous operations in 2 countries and 1,200 officers in a single day just to begin dismantling the financial layer of it. That is the scale of what 30 years of building looks like when you finally start counting the pieces. The social media videos are still online. The footage of him walking out of custody in Slovakia to cheers from his supporters is still circulating. The TikTok algorithm is still serving his content to people who have no idea who he actually is. But the man filming himself free in Monte Carlo is behind a door that finally closed. For the first time in over 2 decades, Arabaci is not the one deciding when it ends. Necati Arabaci built an empire behind a fruit stand, turned a deportation into a throne, and spent 18 years proving that warrants mean nothing without a way to enforce them. In the end, the man no court could hold was undone by the one thing he never planned for, a system that finally refused to let go. But what happens when the top of an organization is taken out by rivals instead of courtrooms? Click on the next video to see how it ends when the underworld delivers its own verdict.